Hi, everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome to Guild Chat. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ruby, and we're going to talk today about development of Guild Wars 2 in 2018. One of the things that we've talked about previously on Guild Chat is that with an MMO, you're never really done developing. There's no point where we shut the door and say, okay, this game is done. We are completely finished working on it. We're constantly adding, improving, changing things. So I've rounded up a couple of our Guild Wars 2 developers today to chat about that and see what we've done in 2018. Let me have you guys introduce yourselves, talk about who you are and what you do here at ArenaNet.
So I'm Joel Helmick. I make things. They're like, hey, we need someone who made stuff this year, and like I made some stuff this year. So
you made great things this year.
So they're like, you should talk about stuff. I'm like, cool, I can talk about stuff. So here I am talking about stuff.
No lie, that's pretty much how the conversation happened.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm Matthew Medina. I'm a game designer. I design stuff. I specialize a lot with story and narrative stuff. I work pretty closely hand in hand with those guys. We have done a lot of stuff to sort of improve the quality of our storytelling in the last several years, and this year in particular, we've had some new cool tech. So we'll talk about some of
that.
Right. Hi, I'm Mike Zdorozhny. I'm the game director on Guild Wars 2. If you couldn't tell, stuff is the word of the...
You direct stuff.
You're welcome.
Yeah, pretty much. Mostly, I'm the player advocate. So when working with the teams, I spend a lot of time trying to look at things from a veteran player's perspective, from a new player's perspective, and identify kind of the direction that we should be focusing our efforts on, and how we can make either the game more approachable or add in more compelling bosses, rewards, those types of things into a larger package that is Guild Wars 2. So basically, how do we take Guild Wars 2 from where it was last year to this year?
All right, that works. All right, well, let's talk about stuff that we made. One of the things that we kind of brought back into Guild Wars 2 and brought it up to snuff for 2018 was the Festival of the Four Winds. And I wanted to start with that because that was one of the earliest things in 2018 I remember talking about, because we talked about that like in January.
Yeah, that's when I first got involved with the project. And I actually was sort of like a bit surprised myself, because I was like, oh, wow, we were considering doing this. Awesome. Having been involved in the previous two iterations of the festival, I jumped at the chance, and so it was really good. But after sitting, in our Perforce Depot for 4 years untouched, it certainly needed a fair amount of, bringing it out, taking it down, polishing up the bits that we needed to bring back, but also then take a look at what are we going to add that's new. We now have mounts. How do mounts work in this map? Because it was definitely not designed for mounts. So there were some definite concerns there about how that would work. Thankfully, it's, it was really easy to turn mounts on in that map and start playing around. And immediately it was very clear that they were going to be really good. I mean, we had to do some map updates to make sure that you couldn't get too far out of bounds. And we expanded the boundaries of the map a little bit to account for the extra space that mounts need to move around in.
Yeah.
Getting on the Griffin was the first thing I tried, and it was just glorious because it's such a vertical space.
I mean, that's one of the things I really loved about the evolution of coming from Path of Fire into Living World and looking at how the mounts play a part of that. We had a lot of fun building the maps designed for it. We had a lot of fun taking them to the old world, but this was a map we had never really seen at that level of verticality, that had as much content crammed into such a small space. And so being able to take advantage of that, I think, was really awesome to kind of see that there was another evolution of what we wanted out of the mounts and that system, and having just layer on top of festivals was just awesome for us.
Yeah, and you had mentioned it was sitting there for 4 years, and that kind of speaks to what we're talking about overall today, in that this is a very different game than it was 4 years ago. Guild Wars 2 at the core of it is what it is, but there's so much that we've done in 4 years, and it's not just like a matter of wood rot.
Yeah. Yeah, a good example of that, a specific example of that is the aspect skills, which is the thing that was central to that map when we released it. Initially, was you pick up these crystals, and then you could move around, and you could jump and lightning tether across chasms and that kind of stuff. And those were great, and they mostly worked, but the tech
Mostly, yes.
the tech was definitely
Depend on who you asked.
Yes. There was definitely some things that didn't, like the lightning tether. When I first loaded the map up, I tried to tether across to things, and more often than not, I just fell into the pit.
No.
Because we didn't have some of the things that we do now of taking the player and launching them across a thing, which is now tech that we have. And so I had to pretty that up, but then also that was authored in a way that was similar to the way mounts got authored, and so the two things couldn't coexist. So as soon as you mounted up, you lost all your aspect skills, and you'd have to go back and get a crystal, and that was just super.
Oh, that's so annoying.
Unfriendly to the player.
Yeah.
So I took it and I was like, okay, we're going to have to do this the entirely different way. So I made it a different way. Basically, it was taking the scripts, replumbing them through another pathway that was friendly, so that when you got on a mount, you kept all your buffs and you kept all your skills, and then the two things played well together. And I think it was really important for us to do that because it allowed us to design a lot of the events around being able to pick and choose, because the whole point of that festival and that map was joy of movement, and mounts obviously impacted that a lot, but so did the aspect skills. So we wanted to make sure that you had the choice, and you didn't have to just pick, I'm going to do mounts now, and then later I'll do the crystals.
Yeah.
So we wanted to have that play well together, so we could design, the treasure hunt, for example, was an event where I saw people doing everything in their in their arsenal. Some, you get off a mount, hop on a mount, springer up to the top, get off your mount again, lightning tether across to the thing, so just being able to do that was so important.
I think one of the themes that you're going to see as part of this conversation is programmers give us a box to play in. Designers will go, cool, I found a way out of the box by doing this really crazy thing over here. And then, it might work in that particular instance, but what programmers will come back and say, hey, there's a better way, a safer way to do this, and we want to give you that tool. And in this particular case, because it's been so long since we went back and looked at that, all of our the tools that we use to build these things, which are now faster, more efficient, better performant on the server, didn't translate one-to-one. So there was a lot of kind of replumbing. And this is kind of the thing we talk about when we look at Season 1 and trying to bring it back, because we know there's a lot of good memories, a lot of really cool content in there. But it's this kind of almost archaeology that Matthew had to go do. This is on the same level of every single piece of content we've done, that we need to make sure works in the new space and plays with a lot of the new features that we built over time as well.
Yeah, and that's from a non-programmer perspective. The aspect skills are a really good example because, these were great. And like you said, they were all about the joy of movement, and you have different methods of moving through those aspect skills, but they don't take what happens if you mount up. We don't think of that if you're not a programmer, if you're not a designer, off the top of your head, or even gliders. I mean, we haven't even mentioned adding gliding in there too, and how those are factors now, and what they might do, and how they interact with that box, and how they explode that box.
Yeah, I mean, gliding was another one that was it seemed like such a natural, and so I had to add updrafts in there. We didn't have updrafts in the map originally, but I was if you're going to jump off and glide, you have to be able to get around. So adding, but all that was stuff that we didn't know about at the time that we built the event.
Those things didn't exist 4 years ago in our game. It's just all of those little things that you have to think about, and it took a long time, but I think it was worth it. I mean, the festival turned out beautifully. Yeah,
I was really happy with the reception and just how well I think everything came together. Yeah.
Speaking of things that seem simple to bring back, I have a list. Sittable chairs.
Oh, okay. We're going there already.
And Joel just leaves.
Yeah. No. Well, so actually, I think before we move on to that, because that's a big topic.
Doesn't seem like it would be, but here we are.
Right. Since we're talking about let's look at old content. Oh dear, there's problems. Lightning tether was mentioned, so before we get to chairs, I will get there. Lightning Tether in particular is a good example of this is a thing that was made in the past with the tools that were available at the time, but better tools are not available. So anytime we look at older content, we're like, well, we made this with what we had, but maybe this tool sucked, or they just didn't do what we needed, and so they kind of faked it, and it kind of worked. And so the way the Lightning Tether used to work is it would jump you upwards, and then the animation would nudge you forward to sort of simulate a parabola. And it was the gnarliest, grossest thing. And so when we were working on Heart of Thorns, we're like, we want these mushrooms, or I don't know if we knew they were mushrooms originally, but we wanted a way to jump you super far. And they're like, this little text, no, it's not gonna work. It's so gross, and it's laggy, and it feels bad, and so let's not do that. And so we put a programming team. The guy worked right behind me, actually. It was interesting. We're like, okay, we'll make a real clean version that does a nice arc. And so then coming back to the festival, we're like, hey, we have this tech now that launches you to a spot. Why don't we fix those skills because they're gross?
Instead of just simulating a parabola, you actually
we'll
had
just
something
actually do the physics stuff. And so with that kind of stuff comes up all the time. We're like, we have a better way to do it now. And so if we're going to go look at some old piece of content and resurrect it, or let's do something similar. Let's make new content, but it's similar to old stuff. And rather than just copy pasting a bunch of stuff, we're like, well, this worked last time. Let's keep using it. We're like, we could do this better, make it more efficient. That was my thing on Lightning Tether. Chairs. So chairs are fun in that there's some history here. When I was originally working on mount things way back, was it 2 years before Path of Fire Ship? I forget when I started on it, but it was one of the first things I did on the mounts team was get a character to attach to another character. We had a live stream or that guild chat long ago where I was flying around on a wyvern and stuff. That was fun. But,
that's right.
Yeah, long ago.
That was a fun one.
It was someday, right? Surely, no.
Cheers.
But so when I implemented all that, a little history first. In our game, there's a concept of a character and there's a concept of a gadget. They're similar-ish, but they have some differences. And they're kind of arbitrary. Gadgets are a little cheaper sometimes. Anyway, it doesn't matter too much. But the point is, when I implemented all the mount stuff, it only assumed characters could attach to characters. And it's well, I just made that decision arbitrarily because that'd be a little cheaper, and then surely we'll never want to do the other thing. Why would you want a character to attach to a gadget? That's silly. And so that got embedded in all of our piping, all the layers, all the code everywhere. And then sometime after we shipped Path of Fire, even when we were working, I was like, it'd be kind of interesting to attach to a gadget, but it's a lot of work. It's not bother. And then as time went on, Path of Fire shipped, and I was like, well, that worked. And then I said, well, could we attach to a gadget? And so at some point last December, I said, yeah, I'm just gonna do that just as a thing.
Okay, so let me interrupt you for a second. Define gadget.
Yeah, well,
people
that's
who
hard.
aren't you.
That's the problem. That's hard. So an example.
In 5 words or less. No.
Yeah, an example of a gadget would be we placed some chair in the world, and it doesn't have a character. It's not a character. It doesn't move. I guess this is really the main difference. Is it doesn't move under its own power.
Okay.
It's not the precise scientific definition. But
I was going to say, because we have moving gadgets.
That's
not
right. It's on the list.
Not a precise scientific definition, but this is why it's hard. If I had a hard definition, I would just give it. But anyway, the point is, it would be great to sit in chairs. That's actually, that's ultimately where it's this would be pretty funny. We should do this. And so I was all right, let me just refactor stuff. And so I went through code and it ended up in the largest changes I've ever made here. The gnarliest refactors, 140 files.
Sittable chairs were the biggest refactor you've done.
It is the largest single check-in. It was this, I conned one of my local programmers into code reviewing it. He didn't know what he was getting into. It was funny. He's like, I guess we're doing this.
That's the only time that's ever going to work.
Yeah.
He knows now.
I mean, it was almost fortuitous because I don't think we knew what we were doing for April Fools.
Yeah.
Until about a month before when they were showing me the prototypes, I was like, okay, well, how fast can we get this cleaned up? I'm like, yeah, we got this. And when programmers say that, it's like, okay, well, they didn't say interesting. Interesting is the scary one.
Yeah.
If they say something is interesting, then you don't know how long it's going to take. But it was like, hey, it's awesome that we had people working and being creative with the technology. Let's go for it. Let's go all in and figure out, because whenever these types of things happen, it opens the door to what designers can do with the content. And so you'll see an evolution of how we've been telling stories in the open world, with the idea of an individual owning an individual character in the open world, which is something we hadn't seen before this year. These are all things that like programmers were just experimenting, seeing what they could do with our system. And again, it's about like, okay, we originally had this box, and now the box is getting oddly shaped in other areas and bigger in certain areas, which gives us the designers the freedom to kind of explore in different areas.
You have more space to play in.
And it also opens windows into how strange game development can be sometimes. Because when I first got hold of, because I was on the festival and the chairs team were sort of coexisting on a certain branch for us development-wise. So I was able to see some of the chair stuff early and was able to put some of that in festival forums, like at the bar at the top, you could like sit on the the bar stools and like actually have, you know, a nice experience of sitting there. And I also put the chairs on the boat that went around the tour, which is also the first like crazy like, hey, chairs on a moving platform. We've never done that before. Let's do it.
We'll be back.
Yeah. But when I dug into it, the first thing I thought of is, as a story person, especially, I was like, I really, really want Queen Jenna to finally sit on her throne. Because she has been in that place in her instance for the longest time, just sort of standing there. And so I went in there and I cracked it open. I was like, I'm going to make this. And I attached a gadget to her throne and realized that her throne is the entire room.
No.
Because she has this large sort of clamshell thing behind her, but it's attached to everything else. So I was like, this is not going to work because she's going to be sitting up and like it picks the, you know, it tries to find the place for her to sit, and there's nowhere for her to sit.
So it was the whole. So
her throne is technically the entire.
Did you get far enough to where she attached and actually tried to sit somewhere?
No, I think it just failed.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
Chairs
on a moving platform. I just want to bookmark that.
I
Go
know.
ahead.
Yeah. You're right. So what interesting historical note. The first chair we actually shipped to live was in episode 2, but players could not sit on them. The Char NPCs, the Omicon, were their like leader peoples. They had like these great big wooden thrones, and they would sit on them. And the fun thing I discovered there. So the way attachment works in our game, it's you just take a bone, like a skeleton bone on the sitter and a skeleton bone on the attaching thing, and you stick the bones together. And the bone that they wanted the Char peoples to sit on was not centered. It was kind of off to like one side because they kind of like slouch because they're Char.
I think they were using like the Doom Throne animations originally.
Maybe,
too.
yeah, that would make sense. And so. Doom Thrones, not gadgets. That's a different story. So, anyway, the problem is, the designer working on it was like, hey Joel, the Char doesn't sit in the right spot, and like, why? Because the bone's right here, and it sits there. But then the Char's over here. Why is the Char over here? I don't understand. And so when digging into it, it's like, okay, what the heck's going on? And it turns out that there's some gnarliness in our how our gadgets work versus characters, where their base rotation is off by 90 degrees. Like gadgets are like rotated 90 degrees from characters. And so if you said, I have no rotation whatsoever, I have an identity rotation matrix, it's the world rotation of that is different for a character and a gadget. I don't know why. I never figured out why. So I had to go through all of the code that does the like if I am attached to this bone, this is where I should be in the world. I had to go through all that code and go, well, if you're attached to a gadget, rotate it all by 90 degrees. And so like whatever this vector is, rotate it like that. And then like counter it is gross. So that was fun.
That's a lot.
It was mind-boggling too, because that was not the first thing I jumped to. I was like, obviously, I was just rotating. Because why would that? Why? So that was worth it, but so you're welcome.
Thank you.
The Char suffered so that you may sit on benches.
The thing that's interesting to me about how you're explaining how all of this works is something that I realized in watching people ask for sittable chairs for so long, is that from a non-programming perspective, a lot of people, and not everybody, not like all of you are doing this, but I saw a lot of people, the way they were asking for it and the way they were talking about it was that in your mind, you're equating it to your physical body in the real world, just walking up and sitting in a chair, and it's very simple. And why is it not simple? It seems like a very simple thing, and you're not translating it through all of this stuff that you were explaining?
When we're building games, we tend to make a paradigm for us to make assumptions so that it's easier for us to approach a problem.
Mhm.
And this is a prime example of past us going, okay, well, sure, for whatever reason, we decide that characters need to be one way and gadgets need to be another. And then future us coming going, hey, look, the system, we want it to do more than what we've done before. And when we look at the two technologies, they're not as compatible as we would think, or there's not as uniform a decision. Now, I don't know why we ended up with the 90-degree offset. Like, it'd be fun to, go time machine back and figure out why we actually made that. I'm almost betting it's like a GW1 legacy thing at this point.
Probably.
Because I don't remember that coming up during GW2 development.
Well, you never notice until you cross them. That's the thing.
Right.
Because they're all in their own little local world. And they're like, we're working out.
And sometimes you find out things the hard way.
Right, exactly. And so this is where, like I'm saying, is like when you come up with a plan to make things easier for us in the short term, you sometimes don't think about what the long-term consequences of those are going to be. Or you are, and you're willing to accept that because it means that you can either get better performance today, you can make it look better in certain ways with certain graphics cards or whatever. But there's assumptions you're making for an individual reason that don't equate to the new formula that we're applying, and which is something that we're always trying to push is, okay, we want to do things we haven't done before, which means we have to think about problems in a new way, and which also requires us to go back and look at our old assumptions and see if we need to make changes to them as well.
Moving platforms.
Thank you.
I was like, I figured you want to talk about that. So, moving platforms are a thing that they have a rich history, to put it mildly.
That was like a pained groan.
Yeah.
Yes.
For a very long time, they were sort of in this space where, so they got added. I wasn't here when this happened, but my understanding of the history is they got added so we could put them in the Victory or Death, so we could have the airship flying thing. Or like, what if we were on the airship and it was flying out as we were gonna fight Satan?
It was, I think, one of the last major pieces of tech we added to the game before ship.
And there's nothing inherently, I'd say nothing, but there's not too much inherently wrong with how they're implemented. They're fine. But there are a lot of little details that you only notice after something has been hammered on for a long time. You're like, oh wow, that was wrong. We should have fixed that. And that's hard to do when you have to ship things very quickly after you implement them. So as a result, moving platforms have this thing where they mostly work, but then sometimes they don't. And so design goes, well, they mostly work, but sometimes they don't. I don't think we can use them. And because nobody uses them, programmers are like, well, no one uses them. We're not going to bother fixing bugs with them because we have so much other stuff to do. So you have this cycle of like, and then everyone's like, oh, moving platforms, ooh.
In my head, this is exactly how the meeting happened.
I mean, kind of. And then we'd also discover new interesting ways of using them.
But we wanted to use. We always wanted.
Yeah, we
to
always
use
wanted
them.
to. And so when we used them in Victory or Death, it was really expensive. So we made the clear-cut rule: hey, don't use them in the open world because the processing of doing all the moving nav mesh and stuff was just too expensive for our servers to handle. And then we kind of left them by the wayside. And it wasn't until Super Venture Box in World 2, and they were using them on the logs.
Yeah, okay. That probably was the next one.
Which was interesting. It was a nice accident because when we actually went back and looked at it, we're like, there's no way that this should work. But the way that they got away with it is there's actually no nav mesh on those gadgets. So it was never calculating like pathing of NPCs on it, which made them a little bit cheaper. So we just started discovering new ways that we could actually use the technology or push in different directions that made it so like moving platforms weren't nearly the taboo word that they were when we initially shipped the game.
And so, anyway, as they start, and then Raisin Fractals, they have some adventurous folks. It seems like, what if we use them more? And then, because people started using them, like, oh, now people are using them. I guess we should start fixing bugs. So the most common kind of bug on the moving platform, I guess if you try to visualize it, if you are standing here on a platform and you're facing that way, and then the whole platform rotates. So now you're facing that way. You still think you are facing toward that end of the platform. You don't think you've turned at all. But according to the world, you've like turned 90 degrees. And what we do in a lot of places is we say, okay, here's the direction that you were facing. Like have store off some vectors somewhere. Like this is the direction I'm facing. And so if you're walking along and there's this platform facing like that way, you're walking along and then you cross onto the platform. And it's like, okay, you're on the platform now. What direction am I facing? And he goes, well, I didn't change, so I should be facing forward. He goes, oh, okay, forward, I know what that is. That's this way. Now that you're on the platform. And so you'd be walking and then you turn suddenly. And And we fixed some of them, but then others would be messed up. Like the like one random example I fixed. Like there's this camera slider, you can like slide it sideways, right? I worked on that years ago, and it's just this like offset of the target position of the camera. It's like, okay, I want to actually look at this point instead of this point, and that did not translate correctly when you would go onto and off of moving platforms, and so it'd go from being here to like maybe being here, and so you'd see your camera move whenever you get onto a platform. Like, it's strange, and no one really fixed it because it's like, it's a moving platform. Just weird stuff happens, right? Like, of course weird stuff happens. It's a moving platform. The mounts were loaded with problems. They had lots of stored out vectors that all need to get updated, and so I spent some amount of time. I don't remember how long, just going through. Okay, what went wrong? And you walk onto a platform. Okay, what went wrong this time? What went wrong this time? Over and over, and then they're pretty good now. And then it just as people use them more, then we fix more problems, and then people use them more, and then we end up with movie stuff. I like the moves. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah,
Anyway.
moving platforms have always presented designers with this sort of I can do this, but then oftentimes you're often like, oh, but it doesn't work the way I wanted it to. So it is nice to see how it continues to evolve. I mean, even Path of Fire starting that first instance
On the airship.
Oh, that's right.
and coming in presented so many problems because like normally we are used to the player spawning in at a set point. We know where
Right.
that is, and like, well, you can put that on a moving platform, but when we first did it, like I'd put you there and the airship would go off and everyone would stay behind. And so you have all the characters and the NPCs and you're like, oh,
Drop
and
in
it's
the
that
water.
Wile E. Coyote moment where you're looking down like, "Ugh, if I move, I'm going to fall.
That's fantastic.
And then we had the programmer come in and they took a look at it. They said they shipped a fix. We got it across to us on the design team, and then we had the opposite problem. Now we're moving and the airship is behind us. We're like, that's not right either. And then, went through a number of iterations. And my favorite, though, was we finally got it all working, but we wanted to have it so that players could have the agency to fly off if they want to, because we had gliding, and we were going to have mounts in the expansion. So I started testing that, and as soon as you got off the airship, it kept the airship's momentum. Yes. And so you would jump off and you'd glide and you'd be going twice as fast because you had both your speed and the airship speed, and it would add them together.
That actually was
That
true
sounds
for a while.
awesome.
Like those elevators were the real problem. Or another. Like as
Yeah.
it's going up, you're like, well, I guess we're going up still. And so you jump off and you're like, it's maybe this free. And off you go. So I've added in a thing where because you do kind of want that. You want, like, if you're just jumping on the platform, you want to move with the platform. It feels really bad if you don't. But if you're like off for a while, the percentage of velocity of the platform that you inherit starts to decay, and then go back to now your air friction has pulled you back to reality.
I think moving platforms is also one of those examples that you look at other games and go, hey, look, this seems commonplace over here.
Yeah.
Why is it so difficult for us? And again, it goes back to that original design assumptions about how we were crafting the game, some of the things that we wanted out of the pathfinding system, how like creature hate deals with players and those types of things. And so there were certain assumptions, I think, coming from Guild Wars 1 into Guild Wars 2 that made it harder for us to kind of look at those style of tech later on in the game. Like, and that just becomes one of those hurdles that as we push forward, we're like, no, we really want to do these things, and they should be simple. Like we look at the common case of this, and we realize that we have to do a little bit of extra work because we had made assumptions earlier on that are hurting us today.
Yeah. It is an interesting example just overall. I feel like we could keep coming back to the whole moving platform question because, like you said, we shipped Victory or Death, and that was the first moving platform that you saw. They popped up again in Super Adventure Box World 2. And in the ensuing years, we've piled all of this other stuff into our game, like chairs, and had to figure out how to make moving platforms interact with that correctly without the weirdness of, double speed gliding.
I think
Which seems awesome, and I'm a little bummed it fixed, but I'm assuming it was not as awesome as I think.
the thing for design is that they're always looking for what is the coolest experience that we can give the players. And so this is where it becomes that kind of that cost analysis of, okay, we want to do this cool thing. We can do a hacked version, which might work, but will make programming want to kill me. Or we can spend the time actually going back and looking at that tech, which opens up the doors for us to do things that we hadn't thought before, or to push in new areas that we hadn't thought we had access to. And I think this is some of the things that you see. Like I look at the initial moving platform of what we saw in Victory or Death, compare it to the way the Raids team used it in the Kadim fight, and it's like that was cool stuff. And so that is like we hadn't even really thought about that back when we were doing the original tech.
Well,
and,
sure.
And this is just what excites me about working on a live game versus one that you ship and you're one and done is like we get the opportunity to go back and look at the things that we did before and say that was awesome. But we can do it better. Let's try a new way. Let's come at it from a different angle. Let's look at the problem differently, and try and figure out what is the next exciting way or the next cool aspect of whether it's storytelling, whether it's open world events, whether it's how the hub plays into the larger scheme of things. These are all things that we can continue to evaluate and make additions to or changes because it's not just the players that are coming along for the journey. We're along with them. Trying to keep up and go, hey, okay, we've told you the story this way and you've gotten used to it. Now we're going to try a different way to kind of turn it on its head and give new expectations to where the game can do or what the game can do and where we want to take it.
Yeah, because you're constantly learning, you're constantly getting access to better tools and better methods, and it makes sense to apply them. But there's a little bit of a learning curve there sometimes. You mentioned, unless we have something else about chairs or platforms. Like everybody looks at Joel, and I didn't mean it like that.
we could go on for a while. I mean, I definitely the back to the opening instance of Path of Fire with the platform. The first time some programming style, they were like, "Oh no, it's a platform."
That knee-jerk reaction.
No, but you have to use it to, as we're saying, people have to use them before we bother trying to fix them because otherwise, one of my favorite bugs on that I fixed, I think some people were sad, is it used to be that if you were on a mount and then the platform was sort of dropping a little, the mount would start jittering vertically, and it just wasn't inheriting platform velocity correctly. It took a while to figure that out. But
no big deal.
But
I much prefer the fix than me having a seizure on.
Yeah, this is your poor little Jack was like, ha.
That's all I could think was like all the sand is shaking off and everything's ruined.
It works now, so that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you had
it always
mentioned-
kind of
oh,
worked.
go ahead.
It works better.
It works better now, which
Yeah.
is the whole point.
Yep.
Yeah. We had mentioned open world and living world and story several times, and I want to touch on that because there's a lot that we did there. I mean, and I had to get my list because there was a lot. Like moving from story instance to story instance without that break, making the maps bigger and better. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things. What would you guys like to talk about first?
The instance to instance thing is certainly one of those that we had talked about it for the longest time, and anytime it came up, it was like, shh, no, don't. It's impossible.
It
You
went in
can't
the box
do
with
this.
moving platforms.
Yeah.
And there was just, I think it was just that the tech just wouldn't have been there to do it when we launched the game. But it was something that we continually wanted to push on because it is jarring sometimes to have a story have to take a break and you have to go out into the open world, and the open world maps follow different rules, because they are, there's cycling events. The world can be in a different state than when you left the instance, and it can be this sort of like take you out of the story moment.
Yeah.
You lose a little bit of your immersion. So we tried constantly to find a way to solve this, and I think it was season 3 of Living World where we first sort of toyed with the idea of, hey, if we could do this, how do we do it? I don't remember exactly if it was the first one, but I know we did that with when you were doing the hologram Timey.
Timey's instance. I think
Timey's
That was
instance.
fun.
I think that was the
one.
first time we used that tech. And then we began to slowly, sort of, and again, a lot of times we will do this as like, we're going to do this here and make sure that it doesn't completely blow up in our face that, we think we've considered all the cases, but there's always going to be an edge case. There's always going to be a strange thing that you can't always account for every single variable in the way every player is going to approach content. So like, what if you're on the instance boundary and you leave, that kind of stuff.
What I was going to say, is there a situation where you could possibly consider every case? That doesn't
Seems
seem like
unlikely.
anything that could be done.
Yeah.
Everyone looks at me like, no. The answer is no. That's what QA is for, to think of these things.
Yes.
So, what were some of
Thank
the
you so much.
hurdles in getting that instance to instance up there? What were some of the things
biggest
that you
one, I
overcame?
think, the biggest challenge that we were presented with is that our party system didn't know what to do.
Yep.
So when you
Oh,
enter an
that's
instance, you
right.
have an instance owner, is what we call it internally. They are the person who controls the instance, and everything sort of feeds off of them. And we can direct things at the instance owner and say, "Hey, do this to this person's party." And so a lot of our scripts rely on that. A lot of the underlying quest tech result has to have an instance owner. And the problem with going instance was we would lose track of who the instance owner was, because if somebody had a faster connection in your party, they might end up in the instance first, and then they're the instance owner now of the new instance. And so and a lot of times it would just move players individually. So if you went from one instance with a party and you send them to another instance, everyone would get their own copy of the instance. So there was just a lot of sort of technical hurdles about keeping the party together between the two. And I don't know what magic we made.
Lots
On
of
the
hours.
programming side.
I didn't. I wasn't.
Yeah.
Don't look at me. It wasn't me.
Yeah, I remember it was funny because there was actually a bug with it too, that because of all the ways that we used it up until episode 2 of the season, we just naturally masked the bug because we had the way that the quest steps had in order. And then when we did the final instance where you were jumping through the portals and fighting that one boss, and then you ended up kind of at the end of kind of space, all of those started discovering new issues of like, hey, when I leave the instance and come back, like it puts me like it was resetting quest steps and kind of doing all these things. And it's like, no, that's what the system has always been doing. We just never knew. And so for us, it was like, it's just broken in this one instance, but it works over here. It's like, no, it's always been broken. We just never could see it before.
And what was interesting about that, and I don't know the history of this, but it felt to me always that this was one of the things that kind of even solving this problem led to us solving another problem, which was checkpointing in instances.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had always been sort of hobbled by on the story team was like, you couldn't have a checkpoint. You just had to have start to finish. You had to finish the instance, and if you disconnected or you had to log out or whatever, you just had to restart the instance from the start point.
That could be
Which
rough.
is still true, but in order to solve the problem of like, well, how are we going to have instance to instance, we ended up breaking up story quests into smaller chunks. And then when we did that, it's like, oh, well, if we're doing that now anyway, why can't we now have these things sort of bookmark where you are in the quest? And so that enabled us to start thinking about quests in terms of, instead of a quest is a long series of events with all these different things, no, let's have smaller discrete chunks of things that you complete, and then at each of those breakpoints we now have a way to set up picking up right where you left off. It does require us to have to contend with that, but I mean, that's on us to do. It's like, that's what we want. We want to be able to give players the option of logging out and saying, oh, I beat this really hard fight and I don't have to go do it again. So let's put an instance checkpoint. It's not always easy. We're trying to do it more and more and more now. I think that's now becoming the standard, that every instance has to have certain checkpoints along the way, just so that we don't have to.
The problem we kind of run into when testing the game on our dev environments and from either open world or from story perspective is the game is not deterministic. So as characters are running around, as you're interacting with it, you are changing what the state of the world is, and it's reacting to you. So, like in the original story quest area, I was like, okay, if everything's going in a linear, and I say, okay, I just want to start from this point, because we had not set discrete breakpoints before. You can't just like save state and then reload, because the game would go, okay, I'm going to run through that path and things are going to be different this time because maybe this NPC was spawned as a child instead of an adult, or was male instead of female, and so the interaction is slightly different. So the way that the technology has come about and the way that the designer's now thinking about the problem allows us to do things differently and frame it in such a way that we can do things like checkpoints and make more kind of quality of life improvements to the system that makes it easier for us to respect players' time.
And that is, I mean, that was a thing that as we were improving it could be rough. If you got disconnected and okay, I gotta or something happens because life exists and okay, I have to stop and log out. Just too bad. I'm gonna have to do all this again. And being able to eliminate that was such a victory.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's more setup time for the designer, but it actually saves us time in the end because having checkpoints also benefits us while we're play testing, and we play test. I mean,
So much.
I would say, taking one instance from start to finish, you're going to have played it as the designer. You're going to have played it hundreds of times, thousands of times. So, like, having the ability to, like, I'm just going to checkpoint myself here and be able to pick up and test each chunk, discreetly, and then at the end coming back through and make sure that all the things flow together nicely. But it really helps. It helps QA as well because if you're saying, "Hey, I just made this change to the back half of the instance," they can checkpoint to that point and then, test the back half thoroughly, make sure that that's clean, and then again go do their full pass. So it helps development tremendously to have instance checkpoints.
You mentioned just integrating a lot of that stuff and making it a smoother experience. And something that you had talked to me about a little bit was taking story instance, like cinematic moments in story instances, and how we've moved those more into gameplay.
Yeah, that was definitely a mandate from upper management and our directors that we want to stop sort of pulling player out of the game as much as we can.
It's cooler to be in the moment as opposed to be a spectator of the moment.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that was one of those things that we really wanted to focus on, like our efforts on that this season.
Yeah, and so it's just it's actually made us work more closely hand in hand with the cinematics team, with artists, because now we are trying to present something that typically we've sort of pushed off on them and said, "Hey, make us this awesome cinematic moment," and
And they did.
and they would go off and do it, and we would see regular updates. But now it's more of us having to have regular collaboration and having them come in. The most recent example of that was when we did at the end of episode 4 of this season, at the first instance when you come out of the keep and you're supposed to see the Shatterer fly in, and that was a big moment that we initially had pitched as a cinematic, and then we decided that at some point, no, we need to do this in game, which presented a number of challenges because you're dealing with a lot of moving parts. And we workshopped that with cinematics team, with producers, with everybody, because it's a moment that it's very fast, really, in game. It's about an 8 or 9 second sequence, and so you can blink and miss it. And so we were like bringing people in out of the halls. We were like, "Have you played this episode yet?" They're like, "No." All right, like cool. Get you in a room, and like wanted to make sure that everybody we showed it to would actually follow the action. And so it's a different skill set. It requires a lot of different thinking about the way that we construct story. But I think overall, it's a great direction for us to be moving in.
One of the biggest challenges when you're doing a cinematic, there's a fixed camera, and when you're in the world and you want to highlight the same actions or same moments, you have to change what the sight lines are for the player or that expectation. What can you do that calls attention to make sure that players are going to want to go naturally to that spot? I think just before that, in that same instance, when the council or the kind of Congress is meeting, and then there's a roar, and we wanted to call people's attention to the door. It's like, okay, we moved NPCs, we had everyone look there, we had a screen shake, we had an effect out there, we had all these things that were building up towards kind of basically putting a giant arrow saying, players, walk over here so we can do the next thing and surprise you what was actually happening. And these are, again, it's new challenges or new ways of thinking for designers who are used to building content in a certain way that I think opens up the doors for how we can deliver things better in the future.
Yeah. And that's, I have to say, as speaking strictly as a player and stepping aside for a second, that was one of my favorite story steps because of that particular kind of work that you put in. Your comment about this, okay, we're not coming out and we're going to watch this little movie and then we're going to get back in the game. But that roar and that screen shake happening in the world as a player makes such a big difference. And all of those little touches that you have to think about to draw the player's attention. You go this way, look this way, go over here.
I mean, this is the value and the potential of a game as entertainment versus a movie as entertainment, right? The player is not a spectator; they're an actor, and so we
Yeah.
need to make sure that the game recognizes that and revolves around that, and then highlights that as well. And so this is again taking more like the approach towards cine events, as we're kind of calling it internally, versus actually doing a cinematic. I think there are times and places for cinematics, and we're going to continue
Yeah,
using them
totally.
because we want to, because there's really cool things that they can do that we can't do in game. But if it feels almost cheap to remove the player from the action in specific cases. So we want to put those back into the
Yeah.
game.
And now that you have a way to do that and you've got a solid direction for that, it would feel cheap to go back and, you know what, you're just going to watch again. Because experiencing it's so good.
Yeah, I mean, it even translates down to the little things. Like one of the things that I don't know that anyone's even noticed it, but I was particularly proud of was in the very beginning of that instance, you meet up with Bram, and the two of you get on mounts, and you ride
Yeah.
down towards the thing. And so I did a number of little things to try to make that, because really you're just having a conversation, and that's traditionally an area where we would just probably just have characters, walk and talk. But I'm like, no, let's not just have it be that. So like Bram will stop if you get too far ahead.
Mhm.
He will stop if you lag behind. He tries to keep pace with you. I put a lot of little critters that kind of direct you, like they're on the same line as you. I have a little thing of antelope type creatures. I can't remember, what are they called? The rock gazelles.
Yes.
Yeah. They hop out and they kind of guide you, because I wanted to tell players, hey, you need to turn left, but I don't
Yes.
want to have a big gamey arrow of I mean, the map markers are always there, but
But in the world,
I want you to experience stuff in the world. So I
Mhm.
tried to do a lot of, and it's all little techniques like that we're starting to try to implement to make it so that you're experiencing the story
Mhm.
and not just, a passive witness to what's happening. You're
Yeah.
actively controlling the action.
Honestly, I'm not sure how many people have noticed that, but I almost feel like that's okay because it's one of those little subtle things that you've put in there to make the entire world
A lot
help
of
guide.
the way that we know we're doing our jobs right and the way how we're presenting it is the things that go unnoticed.
Mhm.
But that players are going, wow, I had this really cool experience. I had this emotional bond with a character, with the game, with a friend within
Yeah.
the game. And so for us, it's a lot of the making sure that the little things support what's happening, but don't overshadow kind of what the experience we want to give.
Right. That makes sense. Can we, if we can we pull it out of story instances for a second? Because there's a bigger part of Living World that I really wanted to talk about because it was something where we had to overcome hurdles and challenges and figure this out. And that's the changes that we made in open world maps and making them bigger and better and doing more with them. And that was a thing that we figured out and turned out really well in the end. So,
Not without headaches, though. I think what you saw was an evolution of us developing or coming into land expansion or Path of Fire at the same time as already going into 4 or 5 months of development on episode 1. And so with Path of Fire, we knew we wanted to build these big expansive maps, and we wanted to capture the exploration that you had in the original game. The first time you walked into Tyria in the Guild Wars 2 era. And so we put a lot of effort into trying to make it so there was a lot of mount usage. And what this ended up being is teams were looking at the expansion team in development and then trying to capture that same element on a smaller time frame. Or feel like they have to go bigger on a smaller time frame. And so we've kind of had to readjust how we approach map design and from a level art perspective, but also from a content perspective, because I think we've discovered new tricks and ways of you can build cool content in the world that doesn't require you to have a flat open space. And that was the natural tendency that everyone was kind of gravitating towards at the beginning of the season. And so we've been finding more interesting ways of how we can make the content more meaningful and not have it spread out as far. But some of the things that we discovered through this is we originally were cataloging how expensive a map was based on its CPU performance. So whenever we do our tests, whenever we do our all calls, we were always looking at one metric as saying, okay, we know this map is performant because when things were much smaller and contained, that was the key indicator. That was our canary in the coal mine. And we kind of discovered with episode 3,
Probably 3.
yeah, that
That-
memory usage
yeah.
became a much more bigger thing. And so because we were doing bigger maps, because we were loading everything in, or with the dynamic loading of or evolution of instances, like the boundaries changing as you were getting, because we wanted to help have that better direct experience.
Right.
We were still loading in the full map, which would mean that that was all getting chunked into memory, which meant that even though we were checking our CPU performance, memory usage was going through the roof. And this is why we saw a bunch of problems and initial crashes with episode 3 when it first came out.
Just a few.
We thought we were good by all our internal metrics, and we discovered there was a metric that we had now put back into play because of the way that we were approaching design that we hadn't considered for a very long time.
You mentioned, I want to call that out because you mentioned that there were headaches and there were struggles. But I feel like that's a part of continually making this bigger and better, because it's not going to be just like, all right, yeah, I feel like doing this thing. Now it's done and now it's perfect. You're improvising and you're improving the game.
The gratification or the excitement we get when we solve these major hurdles is hard to describe, because again, it's that opening up doors of potential that we couldn't do before. But obviously, one of the questions has to come in, like when programmers initially discover, or like designers find the problem, or QA helps us find the problem, and then programmers go, okay, this is an investigation that might be very scary because of, it touches 174 files, those types of things, and that's where it becomes we have to look at it in terms of what's the benefit we get out of this, how much do we want to invest in the current problem solving, or do we want to develop something new? And I think this is one of the balances that we've been dealing with for at least the last since 6 years since we've launched the game. Is do we go back and refine
6
something
years.
we've already done, or do we push forward in terms of building new concepts, new maps, new ideas, new things that we didn't conceive when we originally got to the game? And I think there's that delicate balance that we've been trying to. How can we bring up the rest of the game while still pushing forward? And I think the thing that we've seen is that the quality bar of the whole game has been getting higher and higher, and that means that we have to also spend time making sure that we are making the system robust, that we're not leaving things permanently behind. And this is the delicacy of an MMO, right? Like, it's so great to be able to say, like, we're not done yet, but that's a double-edged sword, right? We're not done yet building new cool content. We're not done yet also making sure the rest of the stuff doesn't crash while we do the cool new things as well.
And you have to get into what seems like almost the pedestrian problem of how do we allocate our resources, which is just a constant thing to think about.
Right.
So yeah, and if it was easy, it's just part of the learning curve. If it was all easy, we would
It's
have
not
done it in
necessarily part of the learning
2012.
curve. It's part of the game. It's part of the development. It's part of us working on a franchise or a game like this. And it is a huge challenge, and I don't want to undercut that or sell it short, but
Not at all.
that's part of the excitement of why people are working on this game, because they like this challenge. They want to step up, and they want to do more, better, faster than we've ever done before. And so like when I was talking about one of the previous episodes being delayed, was us going back and looking at how we can better support our technology moving forward. And obviously that comes at a cost at current development rate.
Right.
And so I think we've already seen some cool things associated with it, and there's plenty more where that's coming.
That's awesome. Can we talk about mounts a little bit, because we did a whole
I
lot
could
with
talk
mounts.
about mouse.
I said a little
Let's
bit.
talk about
Actually,
stuff I worked on. Yes.
I actually have a note here that's like Beetle Tech lifts, but not for the whole hour.
Yeah. Oh dear.
What do you
Okay.
want to? What do you want to start with?
Yeah.
Auto dismounting.
That's probably my favorite single mounts bug. So that's a good spot to start. So we had this bug. It's like a complete jump from what we were just talking about, but like it's still fun. Like we find funny problems and fix them. Like it's part of our job. And so there is this bug where if you were one step back, if you are on a mount and you are unsupported, like you get stuck in some crevice or something, and so you're not really on the ground, but you can't move. We ran this problem when we were working on Path of Fire. It was like, wow, this sometimes happens. This really sucks because you can't move. It's terrible. So we're like, okay, fine, easy solution. We just dismount you, no problem. And so there's this code that detects, hey, if you're stuck and you haven't moved for a while, but you're not supported, we should probably dismount you. And So the fun thing we discovered with that is the way that's implemented is the lowest layers sitting on top of Havoc were like, hey, like this should happen. Other layers above us, you should dismount, and so it sends it up the chain. And then somewhere further up, it goes, hey, I got the signal saying I should dismount, so I guess I'm going to take my character and dismount him. The problem is, it's take my character and dismount them. So what happened is, you would be standing somewhere, there'd be 10 other people around you all mounted, and something that probably a lot of people don't think about is, you as an observer of other players have to simulate all of their physics, because that's how MMOs work. And so you would be simulating, oh, I see that he is unsupported, or he's like supported but not really, and then like he should dismount himself. He's clearly stuck. And so you the signal coming up going, all right, this guy's doing the dismount thing, gets to the layer that actually does a dismount and goes, I should dismount, because I should take my character and dismount, not that character and dismount. And so what happened is, the one mount would do the thing, everybody seeing him would also dismount, because they all thought, oh, I should dismount too, this is a good idea.
Solidarity.
Yeah.
It's peer pressure. It's weird peer pressure.
And yeah, it's just we had never really, it almost never happens unless you intentionally, like, someone figured out, oh, I can just intentionally like stand in this spot and then like it'll happen after a second. And because I think this is in the raid lobby where someone posted a video about that. It's funny.
It's the weirdest AoE ever.
You get some weird stuff when because you are simulating everybody else's physics and whatnot. Like what actually ends up happening, just very brief. You get like broad things like, I need you to move this way. I need you to like turn in this spot. I need you to jump, whatnot. And then so the client who's watching this is like, okay, you wanted to move that way. You wanted to jump. You wanted to like move that way. And it says, all right, and I will move your body around like that. And then every once in a while, the server says, you should be here. And like, oh, I'm wrong. I guess I need to jump back. But by and large, you are simulating what you see other people doing. And so you end up with strange things like this sometimes where if you are not careful and assume, obviously it's me that's doing the thing, then bad. Anyway, it's a wonderful bug. There are other bugs. I don't know how many we want to go into in the time we have, because I could also talk forever about beetles.
You want to talk about the jackal bug first?
Yeah, that's just a nice quality of life thing. That was an oversight from sometimes we go back and look at old content and go, that's wrong. So jackal portals, you're supposed to jackal like bloop, and you go in the portal and out you go on the other side, right? Easy. The problem is the way we actually detect that is we put a buff on you that says I can go through portals, and that buff was not being someone was trying to be clever when they wrote it originally. They're like, okay, well, what if you're on a jackal and you unlock the mastery to use a portal while you're still on the jackal, and then you try to use a portal? That should work. So it has this check that's like every 3 seconds in the background. It checks, hey, do I have the mastery? Do I have the mastery? How about now? How about now? How about now? And eventually, once you get it, he's like, cool, I got it. I put the buff on me now. And the problem is that like little pulse timer in the background doesn't trigger immediately when you mount up. So for the first 3 seconds, he doesn't check, should I put the buff on me? So for 3 seconds, 3-ish, I don't know how many it actually is, you would smash into portals and be like, and so what happened, I'd run into this all the time. I assume there's just some lag issue or whatnot. I hadn't dug into it. I'd get on the jackal, go portal, and
smash into the portal.
Because it's a solid plane. And so I fixed that, and now it's better. And I just wrongly assumed, yeah, there's just some lag issue, and I tried fixing it. And so sometimes it pays to dig a little deeper. You have to get frustrated enough.
Well, that goes back to what Z was saying about making the game better and thinking what make a better experience for the player.
Mm-hmm.
And you made one. And those little quality of life changes here and
up.
there, they add up. They make the world better. So good work.
Yep.
Well, yeah, there was a number of updates this year that we were looking at, kind of the fundamental, mostly specifically with the skill system, right? Like,
goodness.
when we did the underwater rework, it puts a light back on all the underwater content. And players being underwater. So it was like, okay, well, now it's weird that I can't look at what skills I have unless I'm underwater. So I went back and started cleaning that system up. And part of that work was also looking at like, okay, I used a skill, but now I want to slot something else in there. But we had this assumption that you can't change unless the skill's not active. So we started, again, it's digging in deeper and smoothing or trying to smooth out those bumps so that it's a much cleaner experience. The game feels more intuitive. And it's not like I have to learn, oh, there's this one rule I have to keep in mind that I can't do this thing because there's an exception over here. And that's not great. So this is just kind of where a lot of those efforts came from this season.
It was like paving over all of systems team. Like, yeah, we did like systems team stuff for the rest of the year.
A while.
Yeah, it was just skill stuff. That's,
Well, I'm
No-
going
no biggie.
to. I'm going to let you talk about roller beetles, but
Yeah.
first, if you guys have questions, drop them in chat. We'll try to get to some of them here at the end. I just looked at the clock and was like, "Oh, we should
Yeah,
let
that's
Jill
what I was
talk
like-
about roller
like-
beetles."
Yeah. So let's talk about my stuff some more. Although I worked on a lot of the skill stuff too. But like
Everybody's getting to talk. It's fun.
We'll go as fast as I can. So Beetle, there's all kinds of good fun stuff that I had to do to make that thing work. So I guess I'll just pick one of the heavy tech lifts I had to do, which was
Friction.
not exactly rotating collision. So did I talk about this on the little video? I don't remember. Well, anyway,
You can talk about it now. If
it's
you
still
want.
one of my favoriteest things that I had to do, mostly because of the reaction I got from other programmers. So basically, normally when a mount collision moves around, I can't really do it with my hands, but it's like a top, like it's got this little cone on the bottom and then a cylinder on top. And normally they just kind of move like this and they bump over things and you smash them into the thing and Havoc's like, yep, it goes up over the bump and then you keep going, no problem. And for the Beetle, it's like, well, if you're going really fast, I'd like you to be able to go up steeper hills. It'd be cool to like go up a really steep slope or down a really steep one. It's like, well, how are we going to do that? Because you slide up into the thing, like the camera's this way, and it goes and grinds on the cliff, and then it doesn't move. So like, okay, well, easy solution, we'll just take the thing and we'll rotate it. Easy. And so I ran this past Amy, our resident Havoc expert, and she was like, "Oh my, don't do this. What are you doing? No." I mean, it's fine. I got this will be perfect. There's no way that this carefully laid plan could possibly fail.
I feel like there's a little bit of a designer in you.
Yes, a little bit. Well, I mean, this is how you push and so that I added about a month to things, but it's fine. And so that means is like as it rotates up a hill, now like it can like go over like steeper surfaces, doesn't grind into the hill, it can like bounce over bumps and things. But like there were just there was a lot of gnarly. Yeah, I could go into like so much gross detail, but I didn't. Yeah, I don't know how long we have.
You're fine. You have some time.
Do I have infinity time? Well then.
Oh no. Is this what it's like working with Joel when?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
have infinity time. Sweet.
I feel like you are definitely getting the most out of all the mathematics you took
Yeah.
in school for all of the weird
Seriously.
like translations and
Yeah.
matrix operations
I
and
swear I
everything
forgot
else.
most of it still, but yeah, you definitely like you find the actual parts that are useful. Like, do math, kids. Like, you won't use most of it, but some of it, man, you'll use it. And anyway, so yeah, like it's so another minor detail. So the way that I was explaining this top shape, right? And
Do you mean to hand you things to like?
I don't know, like it's just pointing on the bottom and then rounding on the top. And what the way it actually works internally is like if you hit a thing here, it goes, okay, cool. So anything under on the pointy part will support you. You can like stand on anywhere on the pointy part. And so once I rotate it, I'm like, oh, I guess I need to like rotate the whole plane. I didn't think that originally, but then it's like, oh yeah, I need to like still anything on the pointy part here should support you. And the problem is that slope now of like I touched like a super steep surface and it's like 80 degrees or something. And Havoc's like, I don't think you should stand on something that's 80 degrees. That's way too steep. And so I had to do some creative lying to Havoc's like, that's fine. It's like 50 degrees. It's cool.
It's okay.
Fuzzy math.
Yeah, and like fix it up after. It's I'm sorry, Havoc. Like it's like if only the world was nice and clean and all the inputs were nice, then everything would work perfectly. And like, yeah, you can't have that. No, we're going to do what we want to do. It'll be fun.
And Havoc's just rolling over like, okay.
Yeah, this is fine. The world is on fire. And
I do like the fact that the top speed of the roller beetle when you're normally moving non-boosted is not actually the top speed value we put in the game or in our client. That you're faking it with friction and holding the player character back.
Look what you've done.
I know.
Yeah. No, the whole thing is.
Joel's like, I have to go.
Gosh, no. I mean,
He wanted to talk about
look,
mounts.
like I said, I could talk about this for an hour if you wanted. But let's answer a question from our viewers.
Okay, yeah, let's do questions.
Because there's a question, because like otherwise we'll just kind of ignore you guys and it'd be terrible.
Yeah.
There's a question, what language is GW2 mainly programmed in? It is, yes, C++, that is correct. We also have another layer of like our own sort of in-house baked scripting stuff that designers usually use. does it even have a name?
Uh,
I mean,
no, it's
We-
more the tool than the actual language having a name.
yeah.
Although I believe most of our tools development now is in C#.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Tools things. They're just a
No,
team.
We got to give the tools programmers
kidding.
love
We
because
do.
we couldn't do this stuff.
There's,
Because
yeah,
they know
I
where we
say
are
that
right
until like tools team help. Probably
I remember what you said on the guild chat.
yeah. No.
Yeah, this is recorded. I'm sorry, Joel.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Any of you guys can grab any of these questions too.
Okay. Well, one's good, and then I gotta go back to Beetle because Beetle.
Okay. Beetle.
So like the fun thing about Beetle physics is, and just designing this whole thing is, it's super fake. Like under the hood, oh man, it's so fake. It's beautiful. It's this beautiful fakeness. And Griffin is the same way, where it does this kind of like the way that you can like take turns at high speed and stuff like that. It's just like, well, what if I just this is your forward speed, and now you've turned, and we'll just like, well, ignore physics. We'll just like keep your forward speed the same and just assume friction turned you. And it's just so like we're not actually doing like friction forces turning it, like we kind of are, but we aren't. It's complicated. Anyway, there were fun bugs though where when I built Griffin using that same sort of tech, you could only accelerate with gravity past its natural speed limits. Is you could accelerate up with gravity and then it would slowly die off. But you could keep that speed for a while as you turned like Griffin-y things. And so on the Beetle though, it's like, well, gravity's not the only way. You can also hit the boost button. So there was all kinds of gnarly math to be like, okay, well, when you're doing this specific thing, that speed can increase, but only sort of, kind of, sometimes reasons. And that took a lot of that code's also really gross. That was another case of something that started nice and clean and pretty, and then we kept adding pieces, which happens. And someday I'm going to go back to it and be like, we should fix this and make it more efficient. This is just like a smaller scale version of, this is kind of gross actually. We should make it ungross. But that's a story for another time.
Everybody help me remember that.
Yes, I am a mesmer. Shattering
Joel
all the
is
game's
a-
illusions.
Sir Rush says Joel is a mesmer shattering all of the game's illusions, but in a good way.
Yeah,
Yes.
something like that. I hope it's good. Anyway, so there's just a couple Beetle things. There are many Beetle things. I spent a long time on that. It started like December of last year, I think.
Oh my gosh.
It was long ago, and then so I often work on skill stuff too. And like chairs are kind of the same era.
Yeah.
But because I got frustrated
been
with
about a
something on
year.
Beetle, I'm like, let's build chairs instead. That'll be easy.
My favorite early Beetle stuff was when we first got access to one version of the Beetle, and I was like, "Oh, I can't wait to get on the Beetle. I want to try it out." And I got on it, and I instantly started floating up in the air infinitely.
I
Yeah.
remember
And I was like,
this bug.
"Is this the movement
Yeah.
feature
So
for roller
so
Beetle?"
there's a fun story behind that. So I added a thing where this is more Beetle physics. When you are going up, I think it's up or down the hill. I don't remember what. There's normally you have like gravity, like straight down. I'm like, okay, well, so the components of that you have like a perpendicular component of it and then a parallel component of it. And so the parallel component will slow you down, and the perpendicular component keeps you on the ground. And I'd found just when trying to tune numbers that I wanted individual control over those two components, just kind of cheat physics because hacks. And so I added these two new parameters for multipliers on the perpendicular and parallel components of gravity. And the problem is when you add new movement parameters in our grand movement system that we built for mounts, they all default to 0. So any old mounts where I hadn't gone back and updated them, or anyone who didn't have the content yet for like, hey, I updated these numbers, would see them as 0. It's like, I guess we don't have gravity now. You hit jump and then you are off into space.
I guess we don't have gravity now.
Yeah.
Masters
All right,
given
let's
W suck.
It's
W is free.
10 after, so you can have one more Beetle story.
Oh.
And then, because it's fair, I can give each of you one more story.
Oh, man. That was only one. It's like, it's so hard.
Pick your favorite.
Well, he thinks about that.
Yeah.
I'll answer one of these
Let's
do it.
questions. Not the example asks, is Sunspirit Outfit New Physics a teaser for more Armor Reworks to come? I don't know if we will go back and do more Armor Reworks, like that one particular. Adam, the character lead, made the original Sunspirit outfit, gave it to us as a bonus when we were working on Path to Fire, and so we're like, okay, we think we can give this away as part of the, I think it was the pre-order bonus.
Yep.
And then he self-shamed himself by playing Assassin's Creed, and was looking at all the cool physics and things that they were doing.
Oh,
And he was like,
yeah.
man, I feel so bad about the work that I did on this particular one. And so he went
Aw.
back and he was like, I need to fix this. And so he made the changes to it and then pitched like, hey, I want to change this because I feel like this is such a better version of it. I think you'll definitely see that tech being used a little bit more moving forward. And then maybe in the background, you'll see the character artist picking up pieces here or there. But this was specifically a passion project of one of the artists. And I try and get out of the way of passion projects on the team as long as they're like moving in the right
Yay.
direction.
Nice.
Oh, really?
As
Well
long
then.
as they're moving in the right direction.
You caused this.
Well then.
I mean,
All right.
chairs was another one of these things.
Yeah,
so.
no,
It's
I,
true.
I just did that. So I did it right before winter break too, so no one could stop me. It's the secret. It's coming up. I got another shot at this.
I have to go.
Fun stories.
Fun
Questions?
stories.
Answer questions. Fill some time.
I'm not qualified to answer any of those questions.
I am remembering while we were talking about all of these things that we did. I invited you, man. Back in it had to have been 2010, 2011, 8 years ago, before launch, one of my first looks at Guild Wars 2. And I remember just being enchanted at this little detail of, oh my gosh, this character is standing on an incline and her leg is cocked up to account for that incline, and how that was such a cool thing to me and how far we've come
I
in those
remember
8 years.
the first PAX we had the playable demo and you were there.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
I mean, if we're going back that far, I was like,
Go ahead. That
they-
was 2009? Or was it?
something like that.
Yeah.
It might have been 9 or 10.
You were
Um,
so nice.
Well, and they warned me. They were like, okay, so we have Ruby, who's
Oh, God, stop.
super fan, who knows everything about our game. So you better make sure that you're able to show off the cool aspects of it.
And you're like, have you met me?
Yeah, right. So I was like, okay, so here's I think we went to God's Lost Swamp, and I was showing
did.
you all of the kind of what happened to the Temple of the Ages.
I was freaking out.
It was
so great.
It was adorable.
Thanks, man.
You're welcome.
You're
Hey,
younger
if you,
I'm older than you. Yes,
that
that
was
was amazing.
but that was the moment. Those are the types of moments. That's what I want all of our players to feel. And so it's those types of things that are inspiration about when we're introducing characters, we're introducing storylines. I want people to feel those moments and that connection of. I mean, we tried a little bit of this with season 1 of, hey, you were there for the moment, and there was a really cool thing. Actually, even before that, with the Lost Isles, the original Karka invasion
Yeah.
and stuff.
Oh,
And I
wow,
think
yeah.
we hit strong on a couple of those notes, but there's a problem with if that content goes away, you can't feel that same connection with the next player.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where a lot of the focus is how do we give those cool moments? How do we give that aha excitement, that general enthusiasm that we haven't necessarily been able to, that we lost a little bit by not doing those types of content anymore. So it's all through evolution of the game, through the storytelling, through the content we're doing, through the systems, through the rewards, through quality of life. All of this has been
Yeah.
what's fueled this past year.
I'm sorry, I'm lost in nostalgia, and I'm no good to anybody. It was such an amazing moment. It was incredible.
Okay, so Asura
all right.
Hollowsmith asks, what considerations do you make when designing
Yeah,
new
I was
classes
actually
and
gonna take that one.
expansion features?
You can fight over it.
Yeah.
Or you can
Go
both
ahead.
answer it.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, is it cool? What's our budget look like? I feel like it's we should do this awesome thing. And I was like,
I think it's the first one more than the second.
usually the
because
first
we'll
one.
usually do the jumping off and do some of the exploration.
yeah. Well,
about,
Mounts
what
is just take all the budget.
Yeah. And then secondarily will come, okay, how do we actually feasibly make this work? There's an analogy I like that says that GW2 designers are generally raised by wolves. We don't have, as an organization, it's not formal to train, here's all the things that you're supposed to do, but we generally get to good ideas and good results. And so a lot of what's been going on internally for the last year and a half has been putting us more or less to an individual gate structure that allows us to do things like identify, like an innovation gate. What is the cool thing that we want to do for the next season? What is the thing we want to do for an expansion level feature or those types of things? And it allows us to refocus our efforts and allow programmers and designers to take off the producer hat and protect them and go develop a cool thing or go pitch a cool thing and then come back, talk to us, and we'll figure out how to make that work. Or if we can't, then what's the next thing on that list that we can do? And so A lot of the stuff you saw moving into Path of Fire, or even Heart of Thorns originally, was Joy of Movement. We saw that with the Festival of the Four Winds, with the crystals. We saw that in Dry Top. How do we capture that element of joy of movement? And so gliding became an element of that.
Gliding mushrooms, yeah, those two.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, obviously it's the next evolution of that.
And then looking at mounts, it wasn't about how do we do a movement and speed increase. It's like, okay, how do we have that joy of movement and have it meaningful? And having the mounts be characters, as like having a giant bunny sounded cool idea. It was really awesome to kind of go and be able to do that versus riding a raptor and being able to do long jumps. And so that was kind of the joy of finding the new ways to traverse and have those things. And I think this is part of the design challenge we have looking at mounts, is like all of the mounts have been innovating in different spaces, and there's only so many of those before you start squishing all the previous ones.
Yeah.
So that's the fun challenge that we get to deal with internally. But for us, in terms of how do we look at features, is it's what's cool and what's fun, and what do we want to see, or what do we want to experience?
Yeah, what would the player be excited about?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
'Cause we're
Here's this
making a
thing. Like,
game.
oh man, what will get the most?
I mean,
votes on
it's going
Reddit?
back to Mo's adage, right? Like of surprise and delight. Like, what are the things that we think are going to be really cool when players get their hands on it and be able to experience it?
I think it's almost 20 after
Oh.
1, and I am officially keeping you guys from your work for a very long time and kind of your lunch.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we could go on forever, but alas.
we could, but I'm going to have you back on so you can go on for like another hour, and it'll be wonderful.
Fair.
All right.
I did this to myself.
I will tell you all thank you very, very much, and
Thanks for
thank
joining
you
us.
for all of your work this year. And
Yeah.
All
This
you
year has
peoples.
been fantastic from a development standpoint, from a player standpoint, from our interactions with the players. It's been a lot of fun to see the game grow to what it is, and I mean, we're not done yet. We've got a lot of cool ideas, a lot of cool things that we're trying that we want to share with you. So obviously, stay tuned as we move into the holiday
Yes.
season. Obviously, enjoy it, and hopefully, we will see you next time.
we will. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Everybody.